Today on the Inside Scoop, LSU's most important targets. We also have Chad Simmons in the Simmons Scoop. He was out at the Battle 7-on-7 in Las Vegas last weekend, and he caught up with several top prospects. Can't wait to hear what he's got. But first, let's bring on national recruiting analyst Sam Speigleman to talk about a couple spring visits that matter. Today, here's who we're focusing on. Number 13 player overall, linebacker Sammy Brown. Number 29 overall, corner Charles Lester III. Edge, Kolaj Cobbins, Blake Frazier, and then we'll wrap it up with Loghan Thomas. All right, Sam, let's start in the South with Sammy Brown. What's the latest on him? What are you hearing? Who's he going to check out this spring?
Sammy Brown, one of the best players in the country on the defensive side of the ball out of Georgia. This has largely been a Georgia-Clemson recruiting battle. Ohio State is in the mix. USC is in the mix. But now we're seeing Oklahoma get in the mix. Best linebackers in the country. Brent Venables knows Sammy Brown from his time on Dabo Swinney's staff at Clemson. Really looking to load up on the defensive side of the ball, particularly in the front seven, with these difference-making players like Sammy Brown as Oklahoma and Texas get ready for the SEC. These are the types of players they're trying to get in the mix with. I think that they have some to make up with the Clemsons of the world if Georgia starts to push really hard for their home state product. But this is a really big visit for Brent Venables with one of the best linebackers in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides Oklahoma, is there another team that could pull them out of the South? I mean, UGA, Clemson, it seems like those are the teams that are trending. But who else besides Oklahoma?
Yeah, I like where Clemson sits. And like I said, I think if Georgia begins to pick up the pace with the in-state product, that's definitely a team. You know, they're the two-time national champions with a home state kid. But I'd also keep an eye on Ohio State. He's expected to get to Columbus sometime this spring. Obviously, Jim Knowles is taking his swing at some of the best in the country to try to get Ohio State back where they're expected to be. Ohio State, Oklahoma, two other teams outside the Clemsons and Georgias of the world to watch with Sammy Brown.
All right, let's move on to the Sunshine State and cornerback Charles Lester III. This is quite the in-state battle. We love to see kind of these battleground recruitments, and you have UF heavily involved, FSU heavily involved, Miami trying to get in there, but also all the other players in the Southeast. So Charles Lester III, he's going to take some trips. What are you watching in terms of what he does this spring?
Yeah, Charles Lester, one of the best DBs in the 2024 class out of Sarasota. One of my favorites that I've seen in person the last couple of major national events as well. Listen, like you said, he's wanted by all the major players in the country. He had Kirby Smart flying on a helicopter. He had Nick Saban sitting in his principal's office. Like, these coaches are coming for Charles Lester, but I like where the in-state school stands, particularly Florida State. I think that they have a lot of momentum as the calendar flipped over to the new year, given a great season. Mike Norvell, obviously what he's building over there in Tallahassee. He's been on campus at Florida State more than any other school, and he's expected to get back next month. Obviously, Florida State just hired a new DB coach, a name that we're both very familiar with, in Pat Surtain. That big meeting because obviously we talked about Georgia, we talked about Alabama. Clemson just got him on campus. They offered. That Clemson offer is really one to watch. I like where Florida State stands going into this visit. We'll see how he meshes with Pat Surtain, but Clemson is another team that's added itself to the mix, along with Florida State, Georgia's, and Alabama's of the world.
Now it's Florida State's task to keep some of these top Florida targets in state. I mean, this in-state teams have not been able to do that the last couple of years. All right, moving on to number 164 overall edge, Kolaj Cobbins. He's out of Louisiana. He's visited LSU in Texas in January. What's up for this spring?
Yeah, he's making it a point to get out of state to see some of these big players, that aren't a drive away. He's already locked in his first official visit. That's to Michigan on March 24th. When you talk to Kolaj, one of the first things out of his mouth, he'll talk about Aiden Hutchinson and the history of defensive linemen that have come out of Ann Arbor. That's a really big visit. Ron Bellamy has been recruiting Louisiana for some time for Michigan. And then they've been successful in the past. So that visit to Ann Arbor for Kolaj is really, really big. He's also expected to take an official visit to Colorado. He's also expected to take a visit to Oregon. And we already know that LSU and Ole Miss, with the addition of Pete Golding over from Alabama, have kind of rounded out his lead group with these official visits looming pretty large.
Deion's already gone into the state of Louisiana and pulled 4-star Juwan Johnson, who was choosing between LSU and UF, ends up picking Colorado. Do you think that Cobbins is maybe one of these guys that Deion could come into Louisiana and pluck?
Well, I think if we had this conversation in December, I think if we were talking about Juwan Johnson, we would have said it would be really hard for Colorado or let alone Florida to come into Louisiana and pluck someone that LSU really likes, that Alabama really coveted. With Kolaj, we're talking about Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss kind of being the leaders, but he has a fantastic relationship with Pat Hill. He was telling me about the conversations he's had with Deion Sanders about the charisma and the energy, and that visit is something that's on his bucket list. That is just something completely unheard of that we were not talking about this time last year. So I do think that Colorado is in it. Maybe if it doesn't look so much from the outside looking in, but they are certainly in it enough to beat out the Alabamas and Texas A&Ms to make his top 6. So I think that says it all.
Checking in at number 174 overall is offensive tackle Blake Frazier. The big man's recruitment has taken off this offseason. What are you hearing where things stand with him, and is he going to check out this spring?
Blake Frazier, his dad was a long snapper at Michigan, played with Tom Brady. You might have heard of him. And his recruitment took off after a state title run. I think his offer sheet almost doubled, around 30 now. He went out to Penn State. He went out to Texas. He went out to Florida last month. I keep an eye on Texas right there. I know he's an in-state kid from Austin, but they timed that offer very particularly with Blake Frazier, and I think it sat really well with someone who's very goal-focused. His first visit out of the dead period, he's going to go to LSU. Brad Davis had him in Baton Rouge last year, LSU's offensive line coach. He camped there. After they saw the tape, they put an offer on the table. LSU might be making a big move with one of the best offensive tackles, but on Texas, keep an eye on Penn State, and of course, you got to keep an eye on the Wolverines here with the legacy offensive tackle.
Fitting in right there, 289 in the on 300 is edge Loghan Thomas. I watched his film. He's got to be a guy that's rising up the rankings. He's quick off the ball. He's long. He's physical. What's going on with his recruitment right now?
You're 100% right, and he was a top performer for On 3 at the All-American Bowl Combine in San Antonio last month, and his recruitment is starting to resemble what you might expect for one of the best edge defenders in the state of Texas. Early on we were talking about schools like Arizona and Kansas and Texas Tech. Now we're talking about Texas Tech, Notre Dame, Oklahoma. He's going to make a visit to Texas Tech right after the dead period. It's a big star-studded junior day going on in Lubbock with guys like Loghan Thomas, Nigel Smith, Micah Hudson. Those are on 300 players all visiting Texas Tech. He's also going to head to Notre Dame. Yeah, he's going to head to Notre Dame March 24th, be his first visit to South Bend. A kid that obviously checks the boxes on the field and in the classroom. And he's also going to head to the Oklahoma spring game. We know that Oklahoma was very much involved with his teammate at Katy Paytow, David Hicks, last year. Maybe the Sooner staff is hoping for some better luck with Loghan Thomas in the 2024 cycle.
All right. Well, those are some important spring visits coming up. Of course, the dead period ends March 1st, so there's no visits until then. We'll continue to preview some of these big trips that we're expecting the top recruits to take this spring. Sam, thanks for checking in on the Inside Scoop. On 3, Director of Recruiting Chad Simmons is coming on to talk about the latest inside intel he's gotten while out on the road at schools, 7-on-7s, and camps. Chad is plugged in. Let's talk about some of the top uncommitted targets in the country. Let's start with 5-star safety KJ Bolden. He's eyeing some spring visits to Alabama and Georgia. Nothing set just yet. But Chad, is there a team that could pull him out of the South?
Yeah, I definitely think so, Josh. I mean, I think Ohio State is definitely the one to watch. I think he obviously has been there numerous times. He was there for the Michigan game back during the season in November. He has family on that staff. Safeties coach Perry Eliano is related to him as well. So he has that family connection. He likes the coaching staff, what Ohio State has done as far as DB production in recent years. And I think right now, Ohio State is the one to watch. But I think you have to look, even expand that and look into if he gets to West Coast schools like Oregon, USC. He's mentioned other schools and getting out west for the first time as well. But right now, Ohio State's a real threat to pull him out of the South.
What's his timetable to get out to some of these schools and take visits?
Yeah, like you said, he has nothing set up. I think spring, obviously, when he can. He's a very busy kid, obviously, with playing at a program like Buford High School in Georgia, very demanding as far as all-season workouts and training, plays 7-on-7. It seems like almost every weekend somewhere across the country. So I think you'll see him at some spring games, some spring practices, maybe a place or two in March as well. But I think we always say follow the visits, but also I think you can't read too much into that sometimes, being where maybe he's with a 7-on-7 team playing in a tournament somewhere like Phoenix, Arizona, visits Arizona State, something like that. But I do think if he heads out west at some point, he's mentioned to me numerous times, wants to check out schools like Oregon, like USC. But right now, Ohio State is that team.
All right, before we move on to the number one player in the country, Dylan Raiola, I need you guys to do me a favor and subscribe to the On3 YouTube page. We are your place for all the latest recruiting news, tons of college football coverage as well. Hit that subscribe button for me right now. All right, 5-star QB Dylan Raiola, not only the number one QB in the country, but he's also the number one overall prospect on the On3 consensus rankings. He's a former Ohio State commitment that's back on the market. Now, Chad, Georgia's been trending for Dylan Raiola. What does the departure of Todd Monken mean for Raiola's recruitment to Georgia now that Mike Bobo is the offensive coordinator?
I think it has some impact, but not too significant. I think, obviously, he believes in Georgia just being Georgia with Kirby Smart. You have to trust in the head coach, and he knows top programs are going to lose coordinators, going to lose assistant coaches, and to move on and do bigger and better things for themselves. And I do think it has somewhat of an impact. I do think he wants to kind of obviously get more dialogue with Mike Bobo, but he knows Bobo. Bobo's been involved in his recruitment over the last year or so. And I think one connection there too is obviously Matthew Stafford. Bobo recruited Stafford. He played for Bobo at Georgia. The dad played with Detroit Lions with Matthew Stafford. Raiola knows Stafford. His family have communicated about Georgia, about Bobo as a coach and stuff like that. So I do think there's a connection there with Bobo. But again, I think obviously he liked Monken, the offensive scheme, what Georgia's done offensively the last couple of years in national championship runs. But in the end, Georgia's still Georgia, and Georgia's still high on his list.
Right. So Georgia sits still high on his list. So refresh the people real quick. Who are the other teams? Who's the main competition for Raiola right now?
I've been saying 3 schools for a while now. I still think right now those 3 are Georgia, Nebraska, and USC. Keep an eye on Oregon as well. Other schools, again, could get in the mix, but I think right now the main 3, Georgia, Nebraska, and USC.
All right, moving on to 4-star quarterback Elijah Brown. He's the number 6 overall quarterback. He's out of California. He says competition is not a factor, but do you think schools like Michigan, Arizona State, Oregon, teams that don't have a QB committed right now could be more appealing to Elijah Brown?
Yeah, I think a lot of quarterbacks say that, and I think many probably do mean it in the end to some extent, but at the same time, you can't. We're all human, right? You look for that best perfect fit and the best opportunity for yourself, and when they don't have a quarterback in place, I think that's only a positive, only helps that program, which it may be. And for him, I think, he's truly one of the quarterbacks that are pretty wide open, I feel like, out there in this cycle until he starts to get back on the road and take some trips. I do think, maybe competition is not a big deal for him. But again, when schools don't have a quarterback in place or don't have a quarterback in this cycle committed, it only helps their opportunity.
All right, moving from the number 6 overall quarterback to the number 7 QB. He's out of Baltimore, Michael Van Buren. Who are the main players right now in his recruitment? Because it looks like it's pretty wide open as well.
Well, he wants to get back to Oklahoma soon. He told me over the weekend that Oklahoma has really picked it up and turned up the heat with him. He loves Jeff Lebby. He's been there once before. He was there last summer for camp and worked with Lebby and got to hang around with Brent Venables and that staff in Norman. He'll be back there sometime this spring. But I think you want to start, going back to 3 schools again. I think right there is from Baltimore, St. Francis Academy. I think Maryland would love nothing more than to keep him home. With Mike Loxley on him extremely hard right now. Then you have Penn State. He's been there as much, if not more, than anywhere else outside of Maryland with visits. And he's been to Oregon. He went there in January, was there for a game in the fall as well. I think Oregon, Penn State, and Maryland are 3 to watch. You have Oklahoma coming on pretty hard. Then looking outside those, maybe Miami, maybe Virginia Tech. But I think you start right there with Maryland, then Penn State, Oregon, and now maybe Oklahoma.
You think Van Buren's eyeing a summer decision? It just seems like there's a lot of teams still in play here.
Yeah, I do think he'd like to be done, by the time his senior year begins. I mean, he told me over the weekend again, July, August, probably his timeline to make that decision. I think he'd like to really get out to maybe a couple more schools this spring when time allows him to, and then figure out, does he want to take, just 2 or 3 OVs and make a decision? Does he take all 5? I think I'd lean towards right now him not taking all 5 OVs, but just taking the ones that he feels he needs to take and then make that decision as soon as possible.
All right, the last name that I want to talk to you about is a big one. 4-star defensive lineman Justin Scott, the number 16 overall prospect in the country. Chad, he was going to set a decision date, or he did set a decision date for January 31st. He ended up backing off of that. So what's gone on in his recruitment since then? He's had a couple weeks to kind of reset and think things over. What's going on with Justin Scott?
Yeah, trying to give everybody kind of that picture. I mean, he set a commitment date kind of out of the blue. I think surprised many of us. I mean, I had just spoken with him maybe 4 or 5 days prior to that announcement about how wide open he was, taking visits in the spring, and then Marcus Freeman, numerous coaches from Notre Dame staff happened to be at the school that day. I guess maybe he felt good about the Irish. They had the buzz at the time. Set a commitment date for his birthday, January 31st. Then a week prior, backed off that and decided to push things back, take more time. And, schools have jumped in. Florida came in with an offer in January. Georgia came in with an offer in January. I think Georgia is definitely a school to watch. He said an OV there for Athens. The first weekend kids can visit officially in April, the April 14th through 16th weekend. He'll be at Georgia for an official visit. He has family in Atlanta. He's grown up liking Georgia, following Georgia. Has been heavy communication with Trey Scott, the D-line coach at Georgia. But I think Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, maybe USC are some schools to watch here. But I do think he'd like to commit, again, by the summer before his senior year.
All right, Chad, thanks for coming on the Inside Scoop and dropping that intel. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good, Josh. Thank you.
All right, see ya. It's an important recruiting cycle for the LSU Tigers in 2024, and they have a talented recruiting board. I'm bringing on LSU insider Shea Dixon of the Bengal Tiger to talk about the Tigers' top targets in this recruiting cycle. The most important, so let's start at the top. 5-star edge Colin Simmons out of Duncanville, Texas, number 7 overall, and the number 1 edge on the On3 consensus. How important is Colin Simmons to the Tigers this cycle?
Josh, you stole the headline. That is the way to sum up why Colin Simmons is such a big target for LSU. A 5-star, a number 1 edge rusher in the SEC. The offensive line and the defensive line are obvious premium positions. And you look at what Colin Simmons is able to do, just glancing over his On3 profile, number 2 player in Texas, one of the most coveted prospects across the board when it comes to Texas, OU, Georgia, Bama, LSU. He's got everybody on the offer list. But right now, before he kicks into this spring wave of official visits or unofficial visits or however he handles it, LSU's sitting with a commanding lead in the RPM on 3. Josh, does that mean they're getting him? No. But it does mean that he's paid very good attention to LSU over the past year. 4 visits to campus, I believe it is. That'd be more than any other school. So the Tigers enter phase 2 of his recruitment, kind of as we officially turn to the 2024 cycle, as the team to beat.
Yeah, hey, keep getting them on campus. Good things will happen. Let's move on to 4-star linebacker Tylen Singleton. He's an in-state prospect at a position of need for the Tigers. Why is he so important to this class?
I think you summed it up well there, Josh. Position of need and one of the best players in Louisiana. And here's the reality of what Brian Kelly's working with. Louisiana, Georgia, California, Texas, Florida. These are the 5 states that often every year are producing per capita the most talent, whether it's NFL, whether it's the On3 top 100 or top 300. It's a state that's rich with talent. And unlike down at the Big 3 roll-up, Josh, you don't have to fight anybody for this. It's just LSU here. Tulane isn't taking all your best players. UL's not taking all your best players. So Tylen Singleton is a guy ranked by the consensus as the top player in Louisiana. A lot of people feel like after LSU missed on 2 linebackers in state a year ago, Tackett Curtis left the state, Jaden Osbury left the state, Tylen Singleton is now up as that guy to get a need position, someone that could play early at LSU. they are all over him as one of their top in-state targets for sure.
All right. Well, he'll be an important one to keep in state. And no, I don't think the Tulanes or the ULLs of the world are the ones to watch. It's more like Alabama, Texas, Texas A&M, the big hitters. Before we move on down the list, I need you guys to do me a favor, though. Subscribe to the On3 YouTube page. We are your place for the latest recruiting developments. JD Piquel's also on the channel doing a ton of college football content. Hit that subscribe button for me. All right. Moving on to four-star corner Wardell Mack, number 149 overall. He's the 13th ranked corner in the On3 consensus rankings. Shea, what's the latest on his recruitment to LSU?
Louisiana is always going to give you defensive backs, especially at corner. Wide receiver and corner, they can churn out athletes every year, and Wardell Mack is that next guy up. When you are the highest ranked cornerback in Louisiana, you're being coveted by everyone, and that's the case for Wardell Mack. Now, he's been to LSU plenty of times. They hold a pretty good lead on the On3 RPM going into the offseason, and he's a kid who plays his high school football at John Ehret, which is a school traditionally LSU recruits very well in the New Orleans area. So as we move down this list of top prospects, I think you really hone in on Wardell Mack as a guy who, could he get in the boat this offseason with LSU? Could he shut things down before his senior year? People feel like after they start to drop a couple of dominoes in Louisiana, the rest start to fall. I think we've got Wardell Mack on that list as potentially one of the next guys who could end up shutting down his recruitment.
Yeah, you got to typically when LSU stacks those classes, that foundation is set from the best players in the state. All right, let's leave the state once again. Four-star safety, Kadavian Dotson Walker, another standout prospect from Duncanville High School there in Texas. Number 160 overall, the 13th ranked safety on the On3 consensus. What's the latest with his recruitment to LSU?
Yeah, look, we're right back at Duncanville High, where Colin Simmons, five-star edge rusher, is obviously a top player on defense. LSU doesn't have a pipeline at Duncanville. It's a school out in the Dallas area that often OU recruits well, Texas can recruit well, but LSU has made it an emphasis in the past couple of cycles to really spend a lot of time there with Brian Kelly and company taking over. We've seen them circle a guy at the very top like Colin Simmons, but Dotson Walker's not far behind. Much like with Simmons, LSU holds the lead on the On3 RPM. That's a sort of theme we've got going here of LSU being, quote unquote, the team to beat. But they've done really well to prioritize him early, Josh. They haven't handed out a ton of safety offers. They gave him one. They let him know pretty much, hey, you're on top of our wish list. He's got visits set up for the spring. And this is one, too, where they're recruiting the team's running back, Caden Durham. So LSU will have a bunch of Duncanville kids on campus over this recruiting cycle. Can they get any of them? That's going to be the big question.
Yes, can they? And hey, you land Colin Simmons and maybe the rest just follow it. That's the easy route to take. Moving to the state of Florida, four-star offensive tackle Jonathan Daniels ranks number 155 overall on the On3 consensus, but Charles Power, director of scouting and rankings here at On3, loves him. Jonathan Daniels is a top 50 prospect at On3. So, Shea, the question is, can LSU pull him out of Florida knowing the competition that's waiting?
I think LSU offensive line coach Brad Davis is going to side with Charles and On3 on this one. From talking to people, LSU has him high atop the board in terms of offensive tackles. And they went out of state and got two kids in Georgia a year ago, including DJ Chester, which was a really big pickup out of the Peach State. Then they lock up the two best offensive linemen in Louisiana, including Zaylon's Hurd, who was a five-star, finished as one of the top 15 prospects in the country on three. That was a great recruiting class. What can you do to follow it up? And I think that they've obviously early on circled a guy like Jonathan Daniels out of the Pensacola area as someone that they've offered, they've locked in a visit for. He's expressed pretty serious interest. And when we caught up with him recently, he said he was talking during the open contact periods, obviously, to LSU almost every day. So when you have that kind of contact with a junior in high school, it's clear they're a priority to you. And LSU is showing that, hey, look, we can go outside the state of Louisiana, go back into our normal recruiting territories, whether it's Florida, the Gulf Coast, East Texas. That's the theme, obviously, with all these guys. It's guys that they have a footprint in that recruiting territory. They've been able to get in on them early, and I think that's one that we are going to continue to watch closely because I think Charles and On3 are right about this one, and I think he's only going to continue to blow up with big-time offers. Jonathan Daniels, FSU, Auburn, Georgia, everyone's fighting for him right now. It's going to be a really interesting offseason to watch which way that one goes.
Yeah, I fully expect the rest of the industry to follow along with On3. I think we're just a little ahead on this one. Shea, thanks for all the intel on the individual targets, but what is the biggest, from a more general perspective, what is the biggest position of need this cycle for Brian Kelly and LSU?
I think you always start with O-line, D-line, no matter how you did in any other class, just because that's one where you're playing a lot of guys, you have natural attrition there, and you can win there. So beyond that, linebacker, they just don't have many, Josh. They're at 6 scholarship linebackers for the 23 season. We'll see if they take any transfers. Even then, they had to take a transfer to get there to 6. And Omar Spates, he's just a one-year guy coming out of Oregon State. Yes, Harold Perkins is great. Yes, they've got Greg Penn back. Yes, they signed some really tremendous guys, including Whit Weeks, who was one of the biggest risers in the country. But that's not enough scholarship guys to move forward with. So for me, early on, I'm circling the linebacker as a position that we've really got to watch because I think LSU wants to take a handful of guys there.
One position that we are not talking about is quarterback, and that's because LSU got 4-star Colin Hurley on board early. What's his commitment status to LSU, and is he actively recruiting? I see him all at these 7-on-7s and camps. Is he kind of a bell cow for this class?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, he is the guy who is trying to lead the charge in terms of recruiting other players, not just on offense, but on defense. And he's in Florida playing at Trinity, so he's got a guy who knows a lot of kids in that state from the 7-on-7 and high school circuit, but also has gotten to know a lot of LSU's commitments well. And they're from Georgia, they're from Texas, they're from Louisiana. So he's starting to broaden that base of kids he knows in the class, how he can reach out and really start to pitch LSU beyond what the coaching staff and everybody on the LSU side will do. So I would consider his commitment to be very solid. And we know this, Josh, quarterback dominoes drop early, and they drop early for a reason. It's like musical chairs, right? Everybody's trying to grab their spot. Colin Simmons reclassified and grabbed his spot at LSU, moving up into the 2024 cycle. That puts him front and center right now, and there is no doubt about it. He is wearing the LSU logo across his chest proudly here as he enters his senior season and is very vocal when it comes to building what's already a top 10 recruiting class.
All right, Shea Dixon, that's all I got for you. Another 5-star appearance for you on the Inside Scoop. Thanks for checking in.
I was waiting for you to ask if they were going to go 5 for 5 with this group.
No, not yet. It's a long off season. I'll pull that joke out later on.
All right. Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye, Shea.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you smash that subscribe button for me, and remember to check out all the videos on the On3 YouTube page.